All right, so you're scrolling through the news and boom, another election poll pops up and it says this candidate's up, this one's down. But like, do these numbers even matter anymore?
Yeah, especially after 2024, I think we all need like a deep dive into how polls really work.
Totally. I think so too. I mean, that was a wild ride 2024. So for this deep dive, we're looking at an article from 538 called Do Election Polls Really Matter? And they talked to this political science professor, Monica McDermott. She's from Fordham University. And she actually does election night analysis for CBS News. So she's like right there in the action.
Wow, that is a front row seat.
Yeah, for real. So she says the first thing to understand about polls is that how useful they are depends on why you are looking at them in the first place.
Makes sense.
Right, like why are you looking at this poll? Like what are you hoping to get out of it?
So like if you're a campaign,
Right,
they use polls totally differently than like the media does, you know?
right. They're not just looking at who's ahead and who's behind.
No, they're trying to figure out, okay, what issues do voters care about most? What messages are working? Which ones aren't? It's all about strategy.
Like a roadmap. And
Exactly.
then you've got, the media, and they love to focus on that horse race aspect of it. Like, oh, this candidate's up by 2 points now.
Yeah, exactly. It's so easy to get caught up in that. But McDermott's saying that polls have so much more to offer than just those top line numbers. Like, they can tell us a lot about what's going on in voters' minds. Like, what are their biggest concerns? What are they hopeful about? It's like a snapshot of the electorate.
Oh, that's a good way to put it, a snapshot, yeah. Because things can change so quickly, especially in the lead up to an election.
Right. The only poll that truly matters is the one on election day. But that doesn't mean the other polls are useless.
Right, it's just they're capturing a moment in time.
Yeah, and it's important to keep that in mind.
And thinking about how things change, McDermott also talks about how polling itself has had to evolve. Like, think about it, with so few people using landlines these days, those traditional random sample polls are getting harder and harder to do.
Right. How are you supposed to get a random sample when not everyone has a landline anymore?
Exactly. So what are pollsters doing?
Well, they're getting creative. They're turning to things like online panels, which is great because you can reach a much wider range of people that way. But it's also a whole new set of challenges. You know, you have to make sure that those online folks are actually representative of all voters.
Right. Because if your online panel is mostly young people, let's say.
Yeah, you can't just assume that their opinions reflect how older voters are thinking.
Exactly. So how do you account for that?
That's where pollsters use techniques like weighting and stratified sampling to try to make sure the demographics of the people they're polling match the demographics of the actual electorate.
So it's not just about who you're asking, but it's also about how you're looking at the data.
Right. It's a lot more complex than it seems at first glance.
Totally. But even with all these fancy techniques, McDermott makes it clear that polls are still just snapshots. Like we were saying, public opinion is fluid. It can change so fast.
Yeah, a candidate could be trailing by 5 points today, then they have a really good debate performance, or they connect with voters on some key issue, and suddenly they're ahead.
So how do you know if a poll is reliable? Like, what should I be looking for as a voter?
That's a great question. McDermott recommends looking for organizations that are using a blend of old and new methods, like some random sampling, but also online panels. She specifically calls out the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. They have a good reputation for being really thorough and accurate.
Okay, so blending the old with the new.
Exactly, taking the best of both worlds.
All right, I got to ask about 2016, because there's this whole idea that the polls totally missed the mark, and it made a lot of people lose faith in polling.
Right, but McDermott actually pushes back on that narrative. She points out that the national polls were pretty accurate when it came to predicting the popular vote.
But didn't Hillary Clinton win the popular vote?
She did.
So how were the polls wrong?
Well, they weren't wrong about the popular vote. That's what they're designed to measure. Remember, the U.S. election isn't just a simple majority rule situation. We have the Electoral College. And that means certain states have more weight than others.
Oh, right. It's like that board game where some spaces are worth more points, even if you have more pieces on the board overall.
Exactly. So it wasn't that the national polls were wrong. It was that people were misinterpreting them, focusing on the popular vote instead of the electoral math.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about state polls? They seem to be all over the place.
Yeah, state polls are tricky. They have to account for all these local dynamics. Like you might have a popular third-party candidate in one state, or there could be a really controversial local issue that swings things one way or the other.
Right, so it's way more complex.
Yeah, it's not easy to get it right.
Okay, so big takeaway polls can be super helpful for understanding what voters are thinking and how campaigns are operating, but they're not crystal balls.
Exactly. They're just one piece of the puzzle.
Totally. So here's something for everyone listening to think about. If polls are just these snapshots in time, what other factors influence how people actually vote on Election Day? Is it the debates, social media conversations with friends and family? Like, what are the things that actually push someone to cast their ballot for one candidate or another.
Yeah, and how can we all become more informed consumers of election information so we're not just swayed by whatever headline we see?
Right. It's about looking at the bigger picture, understanding all the different forces at play in our democracy.
Exactly, and being critical thinkers about the information we're consuming.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It's complicated.
Yeah, but that's what makes it interesting, right?
Absolutely.
Well, folks, those are some things to ponder as we head into the next election cycle. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive,
Always a pleasure.
and we'll catch you next time.
See you then.